alternativehealthcarecareers.com. And I'm so excited because today I'm going to be walking you through step by step how to create your own therapy podcast from scratch. Yep, that's right. I'm going to be teaching you everything that you need to know to get started with podcasting. So really quickly though, I'd love to know what your podcast idea is. What do you want your podcast to be about? Because perhaps we can maybe take someone in the comments that really, has a really important idea, really wants to share their idea, and maybe we can use that as the cornerstone for today's episode. But if not, that's okay. You can figure it out, and I'm going to walk you through step one of figuring it out in just a second. So let's quickly wait for any of those messages and comments to come in. And if you're on replay too, let me know in the comments if you're watching on this later replay, because, I'll message you back and I'm happy to help you as much as you can get your podcast started. We're going to be diving deep into the information here really quickly, but podcasting is just an amazing way to share your story. So even if you maybe didn't even think that you wanted to do a podcast, it is free to do and it's really simple to do. And you likely have almost all the gear that you need already. And it's a great marketing avenue. And so for any business out there, really start thinking about maybe making a podcast. A lot of people have become famous and become profitable because of their podcast. So let me share with you today our PowerPoint here. And a little crazy screen going on there while it shares. And this is our, we'll share that. Let me do this. 1 second here. Okay, I've got our PowerPoint here. And awesome. There we go. PowerPoint is up. And you know what? Let's make that a little bit bigger for you to see. Okay, so we are going to be walking through how to start your podcast. And I'm really excited because you are literally going to get your podcast published today. Who wants to get their podcast published today? I do. Let's do it. Okay, so here is the outline for today. And here's the steps that you need anytime you're going to do anything, especially podcasting. So the first thing is you need to find your podcast idea. You need to know what you're going to be talking about. What topic, what conversation are you going to be having? Is it going to be about, therapy? Is it going to be about your patients? Is it going to be about maybe a specific injury, a specific illness? Is it going to be about wheelchairs? Is it going to be about careers? There are so many things. You have to find your idea first. And this is an overview right now, and then we'll be diving deep into each one of these today. So hang on. And so we want to find our podcast idea. Once we have that podcast idea, and if you already have it, awesome, let me know in the comments. But once we find that idea, now we've got to plan our podcast. What does that mean? Well, there's several different nuances to podcasts that you may not even realize or know. So we have to think about how many days a week do we want the podcast to go live? We have to think about, is it going to be just you on the podcast? Is it going to be you interviewing someone on the podcast? Who is going to be on that podcast with you? Because that's going to really affect how often you publish, how often you get that content out, and even what your content will be about. So you have to plan these different nuances, which we'll go over. And then we have to set up our podcasting studio. And I know that sounds fancy or scary or expensive, but it's really not. And many of the things you have already, if you've done anything in sort of the online business realm. So much of this you are already going to own. And if you don't already own it, the great thing is if you get this for podcasting, you are going to be set for webinars. You're going to be set for live video. You're going to be set for business marketing. You're going to be set for anything that you need to do in an online or non-online business. So you should have this equipment anyways, and it will last you for life, and it will be so helpful in everything that you do moving forward. So it's an excellent investment. Next then, once we have all that set up and we've got our gear, we've got our idea, we have our plan, then we got to record. We got to make our podcast. So, and yes, we will be doing that today. And if you're like, okay, Emma, I know all this, get me to the record and to the editing section, just fast forward a little bit if you're on the replay. So then we'll edit the podcast together, and then we are going to hit publish to your very first podcast. How does that sound? Who's super excited to make their podcast? I've got lots of ideas, and I'm constantly thinking about new podcast ideas. So let's dive into how to find your podcast idea. So the first thing we want to think about is what is out there right now. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We don't want to necessarily create something from scratch that maybe isn't tested, maybe isn't tried. And on the opposite, we do want to have something unique and novel. And so it's really helpful to do some market research and figure out what is out there. What is out there? And then maybe how can my voice be different? So you want to do some research. So go on to your phone and go to Stitcher, go to Spotify, go to wherever you are, listening to your podcast already. And if you're not listening to podcasts, download Stitcher or Spotify or whatever free player there is that you want and start listening to some related podcasts to your idea. And so look through that and look through what podcasts are there on your topic. So for me, I've been really wanting to do a travel therapy podcast because I'm an ex-traveler. I loved it. I mentor travelers. And so it's just one more piece of the puzzle. I have courses. I, work with recruiting companies already. So I'm like, might as well create a travel podcast. And so I went and I got on my little app here on my phone and looked through and saw what podcasts there were. I downloaded them and I started listening to them. And this is going to help you not only with understanding what podcasts there are or aren't, but also to see how are they frameworking that idea. Perhaps you really have a really complex idea. How are they diving into this really complex idea? How are they making it simpler? How are they making it more digestible? And so it's important for you to not think, does it exist or not exist, but how are they going about running their podcast business and running their podcast? Do they interview people? What's the intro even? I even looked at, how does the intro music sound? Is it upbeat? Is it not upbeat? What does that sound like? What is their intro? What words do they use in their intro? And I'm not saying copy, but you're just trying to think of these nuances because when you're creating any new business, you don't realize all these little details. So it's important to start listening and thinking about those little details as you dive in so that we can make you the very best podcast possible. So you're going to research on like Google podcasts and even Amazon. Go into Amazon and go to like Amazon Books. It's so helpful. Go there and do some research and see what books are selling like hotcakes. Might as well make that into a podcast. Come on. So what I've got here, let me pull up. I think I have to find another tab. Let's see. Will that show? Let's see. Got this. Okay. We'll show you this one. Okay. So we are going to search through some of these podcasts. So this is Google Podcasts here. You can go to podcast.google.com, although it's really easiest to search podcasts on your phone because you can then directly download them, directly listen to them. So it's a lot easier. But we're just going to go here and we're going to search. And let's say you want to do something. Pelvic floor is really hot. So let's do pelvic floor. Now remember, some people may not call it pelvic floor. It may be called something else. So we've got the Pelvic Health Podcast. And look at how is their graphic. You can even read their little intro blurb. You can even look at more of their episodes here. Your Pelvic Floor Power Source, Ben Greenfield Fitness. Okay, let's move your pelvic floor, restore your core diastases. There's a couple different ones here. So we can go and we can click on them and we can see this one's male pelvic floor and incontinence research. So a more research-based one. So now we're getting into the nuances. You can see that some people are going after like a very sophisticated scientific approach, which would be much more towards, researchers and towards clinicians versus other people are, if we hit back here, this one's probably more for, just the average Joe who needs has some pain and needs to know how to correct their pelvic issues. So you can go through and you can search these different different podcasts. And when you're thinking about what to create in your podcast, think about, what are you passionate about? What are you knowledgeable about? And then what do you think people are interested in listening to? So you can go and you can check out these podcasts, and you know that if there's 10, 12, 15 podcasts out there on a topic, that there's something to that. What have people been asking always? Like, what do you hear all the time in the questions on Facebook groups or on Instagram? What are people constantly asking questions about? What are your peers or your coworkers constantly asking you or other people about? Make that maybe your podcast topic. And when you make your podcast, like, you can always pivot. There are a lot of different podcasts that sort of slightly changed their name or pivoted to branch out into other topics. But it's nice at first to try to narrow down a little bit so that you can be that person, the pelvic floor person, the running person, the athlete person, so much more. Okay, so hopefully you have found your podcast idea. So I want you to put in the comments what that podcast idea is. I'm super pumped to hear and to discover any of these neat ideas. I mean, I'm sure you're a lot more creative than me, so I'm eager to find that out. Okay, so now let's move on to the next topic, which is going to be, now that we have our idea, now we've got to plan our podcast here. So there's a couple things that we need to talk about. And so when planning your podcast, you have to, let me go to that slide here. Okay, woohoo! I love playing with my new toys. So when planning your podcast, you have to think about, how often will your podcast be published? And so why is that important? Well, if you're going to be publishing your podcast daily, do you have the bandwidth to do that consistently? Not just 1 week from now, 1 month from now, but 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now. If you want to make this something that's going to be great, you have to take some time to build it. So how often will this podcast be published? And so if you're really busy, if you don't have that much time, then I would recommend like a bi-weekly or at least a monthly. Do not go longer than 1 month a podcast, because you want to keep your listeners listening. You want to keep them actively engaged. If you don't update your podcast enough, they'll just stop listening. They'll just not be engaged. They'll forget about it and move on to the next thing that's more in their face. So that's why you want to at least do once a month. Recommended is really, I think, twice a month. So basically bi-weekly. I think that's a really reasonable start. And you can always do more or do less, but I think twice a month is a really great start for anyone. Now, the other thing you have to think about is, if you want to do it more often, then there's a give and take between the length of the podcast. So there are daily podcasts, there are weekly podcasts, but they're a different length than the 1 a month or the bi-weekly. So your longer podcasts are going to be less often, because it's going to take longer for the consumer to consume that. It's also going to take longer for you to produce it and to edit it and all sorts of things. So that's why if you have a longer podcast, usually it's going to be about twice a month to maybe 1 a month at the latest. Now, if you want to do a daily, then maybe just a 5-minute one, like, hey, here's my 5 tips for dementia, blah, 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 blah. Tomorrow, we will talk about caregiver training. And it's just really fast, really quick, just simple tips. So it's like a 5-minute, 10-minute. That's the type of podcast. If you are doing like a daily or a weekly podcast, that's what you would be doing. Now, so we talked about how often will you record, and that really is related to how often you will be publishing the podcast, as well as how often, how long will you be on the podcast. But now we have to talk about the interview style. Is it just going to be you? Is it going to be you and a consistent friend that's going to be like your consistent co-host? Or is it going to be you, your co-host, and a guest? Is it going to be just you and a guest? All those things you have to think about. And it comes down to time. How much time do you have? Though when you have to have a guest, it takes a lot more time than just sitting down and recording. So if you don't have that much time and you have a lot of knowledge and passion, perhaps at first you start with it being just you educating And then you move into more guests that are like occasional sprinkles within your normal podcasting workflow. So that it's like, oh, we have a special guest, and it's not consistent, but it's just when you have more time, you can maybe bring in a new guest. Or it could be just you and a co-host. That's really nice because then you don't have to constantly be finding guests. You have this consistent person that is always there. And that's really nice because you can feed off of each other. There's just way more energy when you are with someone than when you're just alone talking to the microphone like I am. So all things for you to think about then is how often will you how will you monetize it? So this is a lot of times where people get in trouble is that they don't think about how will you make money doing podcasting. Yeah, it's fun, it's enjoyable, but ultimately we want this to lead you to, a profitable side hustle, something profitable. And so how will you monetize? And there's several different ways that you can monetize. You can monetize by having advertising. So you can find related topics. Like MedBridge is a common company that does a lot of affiliates. And so you can have an affiliate code and be like, hey, thank you so much for listening to my podcast. Use code alternative careers for 40% off of MedBridge CEUs. And you just add that in and maybe you get a little bit of money, but it's not that lucrative, but it's a great way to start because affiliates are very easy to get. You can get them right away as a brand new beginner, and at least you're earning some income there. You can also get sponsors, which are sort of like more true advertising. So maybe you have someone that's going to pay you, $500 a month, and they are at the, they're maybe within the beginning, middle, and end of your podcast. And you're saying, oh, thank you for such and such business for sponsoring this podcast. And so that's another way to monetize. And then the last way to monetize is to bring them back to you. So maybe instead of doing sponsors or affiliates, you sell your own stuff. Maybe you sell your courses or your digital agency or your skills, your services, your clinical business, your clinical practice, your e-commerce, and you bring them back to you so that then you are getting those sales. So those are the different ways to monetize. So I just want you to think about that as you are creating your podcast because I want this to be something sustainable, fun, but also sustainable. Okay, any questions so far? Put them in the comments. Let's check out the chat here. Let's see here. Awesome. Okay. So now let's go to equipment. So we need to do our equipment next. So there's several different equipment you need. Number one, you already have it, a computer, because you need to record your podcast and you need to edit it. So having a computer is really, really important. You can have a Mac or a PC. Doesn't really make a big difference. I think I've had both and I actually prefer Mac now, even though they're way more expensive. But you can do what you need to do equally the same on Mac and on PC. So you need a computer. Then you need a microphone. So you can get a Samsung AT2100 or the Blue Yeti. Those are two different microphones that I recommend you get. You don't need both. You can use one or the other. So the Samsung is the cheaper version, and it's about $70, although prices are changing. And then the Blue Yeti runs around $120-ish, $150-ish. I highly recommend that you get the Blue Yeti. One of my biggest frustrations is that I move around a lot. So if I move around, you maybe hear that audio is changing. And so the Blue Yeti has different features where it can pick up the sound all around the microphone. So that's great for in-person interviews where you can be seated across from them and it's picking up both of you. The Samsung, which is what I have right here, it only picks up just directly in front of it. And so that's the downside. So I really like the Blue Yeti. It's a little bit more expensive, but so much more versatile. So I highly recommend you just spend a little bit more and use that, and you'll have it for forever. I've had this for 5 years. So this is a one-time payment of $150, and you'll have it for pretty much the rest of your life unless you really beat it up. And so if you want links to any of these, I've taken the time to find the most affordable prices. And so in the comments, you'll see the links to each of these so you can go ahead and get your podcast gear right now and get it all set up. Okay, so that's our microphone. Then we have to go to scheduling and recording. So scheduling, really easy, super easy. You can just get absolutely free Calendly. Calendly is a scheduling software, and it's so easy to make. It takes you 5 minutes, and just go in there and connect your calendar. Just make it say podcast schedule, and then they will schedule a time to meet with you. And you can book out exactly what time. So if you work, just book out all the daytimes. And so then you've got the night times for free. You can do those adjustments. And then that will give them a nice little reminder. It'll give you a reminder as well. And it'll save you from that email back and forth that can happen. And that's really tedious. And it just is much more professional. So you give them a Calendly link, they pick the time, and then you give them your Zoom link. Or even within that Calendly, you can have a continuous Zoom link. So you have a Zoom meeting link, and then you can make individual meetings. So you can just give them whichever you prefer. If you start booking a lot of people, I like creating individual Zoom meeting rooms because I know I've got Brian, I've got Bob, I've got Jenny. And so it helps me a little bit with my organization. But I do then have to make them a unique room each time versus if you have just your personal meeting room, it's a consistent link. You don't need to do anything with that. And then you just hop in at that time. And so then with Zoom, very easy to use. If you don't already know Zoom, I'll be, making a video soon. It's not ready yet, but depending upon when you watch it, you can go in the cards up here and watch how to create your Zoom schedule for podcasts, but really you can use it for any other interviews as well. And so within Zoom, when you hit record, you can record yourself or you can record yourself and other people. And then when you finish, even on the free plan, when you finish, it will give you the audio and video file in MP4, but then it'll also give you just the audio file MP3. And that's great because you don't have to extract the audio from the video. You can take that right away and put it into your podcast editor. So that is our scheduling and recording. Very simple. Make your Calendly link, give that to people, have within that either your permanent Zoom meeting room link or because you'll have instructions like go here at this time and click this link. Or you can then, after they schedule Calendly, create their own individual meeting room link and then email them that specific link as well. You can choose whichever way you want. Okay, so now that we've got the scheduling set up, we've got that system, we've got that workflow, then you've got to get the gear that you need for editing. So that is Audacity if you are on a PC. And then if you're on Mac, you get GarageBand. So GarageBand is already come downloaded in your Mac computer. So there's nothing more you have to do other than click it and it will open. If you are on a PC, you do have to go and on Google, go to Audacity, download that, and then it will become an icon on your desktop that you can then just open to edit and record as well. Both are 100% free. And then if you're probably asking maybe what are some pros and cons to Audacity versus GarageBand, they're both about the same. I like GarageBand a little bit better, but I know a lot of people like Audacity too. I think they're both really excellent, easy to use, and hey, what's better than free, right? Okay, so now let's move on to the podcast workflow again, just to remind you of that. So we've got the Calendly link. So we're going to find our guests and we're going to maybe Facebook message them. We're going to email them. We're going to call them. And then we're going to give them our Calendly link. They're going to pick a time which we've specified. We've booked out the times which we can do and blocked out the times which we can't do. That way we're not going to have any mishaps when we schedule. So we're going to provide that link that has it all set. They're going to click and choose a time, and you're going to automatically get notified in Calendly of that. And then we got the Zoom. We're going to meet them in Zoom at that day and time, and we're going to hit record, and we're going to record our podcast. And then once again, if you're like, how do I do that in Zoom? We'll put that up here. Then you're going to bring that podcast, that MP3, and we're going to bring that file into our GarageBand or our Audacity. And then we edit it, fix it all up, and then boom, now we got to promote it and put it into our podcast host and share it to the world. Okay. Who has questions? Who's overwhelmed? I do not want you to be overwhelmed because podcasting is super easy. That's why we can pretty much do it all in this session. Okay. So that's our workflow. And it's very simple. And if you're going, this is everyone's workflow too, by the way. This is like everyone, even famous people. This is their workflow. So copy it, use it. You can do it. Okay. So now let's talk about publishing our podcast really quickly. And then we will go into some recording and editing. So where to host your podcast. So after we have gotten our podcast in Zoom, we've edited it in Audacity or GarageBand, now we have to share it to the world. And so how do we do that? Luckily, there are free and paid podcast hosts. So if you have a website, you know what a host is. It's like GoDaddy, Cloudways. There's a lot of different hosts out there, and they store the podcast so that then it can be played all over the world. And so the number one free host is Anchor. And I'll be showing you Anchor at the end. That's what we'll be using today. But you can have paid. You can have Podbean, Libsyn, Castos. Those are really my favorite and really, amazing podcast hosts, which I highly recommend. And so why would you choose podcast hosting that is free versus paid? So it's a really good question. So free with Anchor does not necessarily come without strings attached. So you have advertising at the end of your podcast by Anchor. You cannot remove it unless you go to a paid host. So free, Anchor gets to promote themselves. That's the give. And so at the end of your podcast, it's a nice advertising, but they just say, hey, want to do a podcast too? Come to Anchor. Now, I do get around that by basically bringing the music at the end of my podcast extra long. And so hopefully people don't listen extra long after it ends, and so they'll never hear the ad. However, with Anchor, who knows what will change? Halfway down the line, maybe they now want to do ads in the middle of your podcast. Maybe they want to do ads in the beginning of their podcast. You don't have control over that. They do. And so that's the scary thing. So a lot of people who want this to really be their business choose paid. Now, if you are saying, I'm okay with there being ads, like I'm flexible with it, I just want it to be, a small marketing tactic, maybe some fun, maybe help some people, then go Anchor. But if you really are maybe thinking that that's detrimental to have and you want to have more control, then you can go a paid like Castos or Libsyn or Podbean. And you can always put in your own ads to these. Don't get me wrong, you can always put in your own ads, but the paid, you'll have complete control and they won't be able to do anything within your audio. Okay, so let's get going here with creating our podcast here. So let me share a little bit more. Who has questions? Who's having fun? Let me know. I'm working really hard, and I spent a lot of time in this PowerPoint to really hopefully make it extremely beneficial and helpful for you. And if you are really hopefully learning and enjoying this, find me at all entertaining, then share a comment below and please subscribe and hit the bell for notifications, because I really work hard to have really helpful resources, not just on podcasting, but on entrepreneurism, on alternative healthcare careers. And so we really want to be an amazing resource for you. And we know that we are going to continue to give you amazing resources. So, come be part of the family and subscribe and hit that bell so then you can know when we got new stuff. Okay, so let's go to start recording here. So I'm just going to share my screen again. Okay, so I'm sharing my screen here. I'm going to get rid of this. and we got Audacity here. Okay, so this is Audacity. I have a PC, and let me just, hopefully this is showing up okay. Okay, so we have a PC right here, and so we're using Audacity. And so at the top here, we have different features, which I'm going to go over really quickly. So first, right here is your microphone. You want to make sure you've selected your appropriate microphone. Then you've got right here, this is how sensitive your microphone is. So if your microphone's really picking up a lot of noise, you can bring this down. If it's not picking up a noise, you can bring it up. Then this is just the speaker volume in your headphones. Then over here, we've got different functions, which I'm going to show you as we edit, but these are more of your editing tools. Then over here, we've got your different playback functions and your record. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit the record button and we are going to do a little recording. So let me, oopsies, I think, there we go. It's probably that. Okay, there we go. Hopefully now it's showing up. I think I wasn't sharing the screen appropriately there. Sorry about that. Okay. So we're hopefully sharing the screen here and we're going to record. So I'm going to hit the play button here and we're going to do the intro first. Okay, good. I see it now. Okay. Welcome to the Traveling Therapist Podcast. My name is Dr. Emma Shapiro and I will be walking you through step by step how to become a traveler and pay off your student loans. Okay. So I hit the red button to record. I hit this button right here, the square, to stop. This is our intro. Now, it's helpful to have a pre-written intro that you can just read off. You always want to give yourself a little bit of room here because you can always edit this, and then a little bit of room here so you're not hitting end too fast. So let's hit the play button to hear how that sounds. Ooh, that sounds pretty good. I'm happy with this. Okay, so now we're going to take this little selection tool here, this little eye, and we got to trim this. So I'm going to click, and then I'm going to drag, and then I'm going to hit delete or backspace. Same thing in the beginning here. And I want to actually, do you see this little teeny tiny little dot right there? That was my breath. And so we want to get rid of that. This is all normal curves here, but if you have any breaths that aren't too hard to edit, you want to edit that. So we're going to click and drag and hit delete. Okay, now it won't have that much excess space and that's all good. So now let's go and we are going to then add, we're going to add another track. So let me go like that. I got so many windows open here. And we are going to drag our MP4 in. There we go. So this is some music. So whenever you're doing an intro, you need to have music that is going to make you sound professional in your intro, make it fun, and then you can dive into the podcast. So that's what this music right here is. And so obviously you can see though that this music is way too long for our podcast intro. So we're going to take, and we're still on our little eye cursor. We're going to click, and usually you want a little bit extra because you're going to have a little bit of music only, then music with talking, and then maybe a music fade to then regular podcast. So we're going to give ourselves like maybe to here so that we got a little excess, and we can always trim it more. So let's trim this. Okay, so remember I just clicked, and then I'm gonna zoom in a little bit more here. So right here you can zoom. So I hit the little plus microphone. That way you can see this a little bit better. Okay, so we've got this, but now it's going to sound way too loud. Listen. Way too loud, right? Way too loud. Okay, so the first thing we have to do is I want to move this so that we get a little music only to then talking. So that's looking good there. So I hit this little move button and that moved it. That way we get a little music fade, talking, music fade, and then we can go into our podcast. So now though, we've got to fade this music because it's way too loud. It's overpowering, right? You can't hear me. So there's this little, I don't even know why it looks like that. It doesn't make any sense to me, but there's this little line dot. So that's our sort of our, oopsies. I don't want to select all of it. There we go. I selected just this track, and then I'm going to hit the dot here. And then, let's see. So wherever I hit the dot is going to be where I can start fading in. So I'm going to do just a couple dots here. Okay, you're going to see this happen. So I first just wanted to make it softer, so it's not super, super loud at first. And then I'm going to drag this down more. And then this one's coming down even more. There we go. Okay. And then we're going to do like a dot here, and that. So then it's starting to really quiet down as we fade into the real podcast material. So I basically made these different dots, and now it's going to slowly fade all the way away. So let's listen. See how it's going softer? Perfect. And then now we are ready to do our real episode. So we faded it, and that's sort of how you get that nice sort of flow. So it's a little bit louder in the beginning, then it fades into, and you can adjust this if you want it to be, oh, that's still too loud. We could make it a little softer there. There you go. If you felt like it was still too loud. But perfect. Okay. I think we've got a really good intro that I'm pretty happy with. So now we're going to bring our cursor over here. Okay. And now we are going to record again. So now this would be where I would maybe drag in my my Zoom, or if it's just me recording, I would just record some more. So I can say like, welcome to this very first podcast episode on traveling. I'm so excited to be your host and teach you all about traveling. My name is Dr. Emma Shapiro, and in this very first episode, we are going to talk about how I got started as a traveler. Blah, 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 blah. I would keep talking. Okay, and then we'll hit pause. So this is where then you would get into the meat of your podcast. Now, just like how we edited our intro, we can go through and we can edit this. So maybe too long a pause here. So maybe we go back to our I, we select, we delete, and now we've got a little pause, which is good. And then it goes into the real podcast. Now, in terms of editing, one thing I really want you to take away from this is you don't need to over edit. When I first started podcasting, I literally went through and I cut out every single every single and all of that. It was so tedious. And when I listened to it, it actually didn't sound very good because it didn't have the flow. And it also just didn't sound that different. It wasn't needed. All that micro editing wasn't needed, not important. So biggest things is to edit really big free spaces. So say you mess up and you have a big long pause where you didn't hit stop record, but you kept recording and then started to talk again, I would delete that. So you're going to delete any free spaces that you have. Say you sneezed, say dog barked, something crazy that's really loud, then you can edit that. But otherwise, pretty much just trim on the front, trim on the back, and you're good to go. Make it simple. So that is the podcast. So if we're happy with this, we've done our editing, everything's good. Now, also what I would do is do an outro. So very same thing with the intro, we're going to do at the end of the podcast. Now, note that you don't have to do the intro over and over again. You can save as a file just this intro with the audio and then drag that in so that you've already got your pre-made ends and intros. That way it's all set to go and it's a lot easier. And then you just add the middle either your self-recording or from Zoom, and then you're all set. So this process can actually be very quick. Okay, so now we're going to go to, let's save it. And we'll just exit. It's okay. So we're going to export as MP3. So we're going to hit export as MP3. We can save this as Emma's YouTube podcast. And then we'll hit save. You can edit all of these things, but really you can just just delete it if you want to. We'll hit OK. And there we go. Now it's saved on my desktop. How awesome is that? You just learned how to record your podcast and how to edit it. And hopefully you realized it's pretty simple. I can do this, right? I can do this. And really, if you're doing Zoom, there's not that much work because a lot of your guests are going to be providing you with that content. So now the very next step here, let me stop sharing we can share my screen some more here, is we're going to go to Anchor and I'm going to show you how to put everything in Anchor. So let me stop sharing my screen here for a minute. Woohoo! Everyone excited? Yes, please. If you are not seeing the screen. Oh, got it. Perfect. Not hearing your recording. Oh, no. Hopefully you are. Woohoo! Everyone excited? Yes, please. Hopefully it was maybe a music fade to then regular audio. Oh, maybe it wasn't hearing. Were you guys not hearing my podcast audio? Thank you, Barbara. I appreciate you being in here and helping me. This is like my first YouTube live, so I'm a little nervous. But thank you. Hopefully you guys are seeing it now. Okay, so we're going to go to Anchor here. Let me reshare that. Okay, so we're in Anchor. Let me spotlight that. Okay, here you talk. Awesome. Was it not hearing the podcast? Was it not hearing the audio? I wonder if that's because I maybe have my headphones in. Okay. So let's go to Anchor here. We're home here. So Anchor is the free podcast host that I really recommend because it's so simple. So you can create a free account, and this is what the back end is going to look like. So when you first create your podcast, you have a little graphic that you're going to create, and then you have the information. And this little pencil just helps you edit it. So you're going to put in your name, you're going to put in your description, you're going to put in your cover art, you're going to select a category, a language, if it's clean or explicit, and just go through the different account settings. And you can put in your different social media here because Anchor will also sort of make you a mini website. So if you're really not tech savvy and you really just want to get this started quickly, you don't even need to create a website too, because you can just funnel people back to your Anchor site. And so that's the sort of like the podcast settings. So let's go back to our dashboard here. So we edited our podcast settings and we set that up. So now after we set that up, we're going to go to new episode. And so right here, you can actually record within Anchor. However, the reason why I do not recommend recording within Anchor is because it doesn't have the editing features that say Audacity does and GarageBand does. So you really want to have good editing features. And so that's why we want you to not record in Anchor, but just upload to Anchor. Hopefully that makes sense. But you can record here and you can do other things here, but we can go to library or we can just drag in our file right here. So, oh goodness, my desktop is so messy. No one look at my desktop. Where's our export? I should have saved it to a neater. I should have cleaned up my desktop. Well, let's just pretend that it's this one. New podcast intro. Okay, so all I did was drag it in, and now it's just sort of sensing it, just sort of processing it. Only takes a quick second. Okay, awesome. So we have that in here and we can play it. Okay, so we can test and be like, okay, sounds good. Yes, that's the right one. Awesome. So then we're going to hit save. Usually it's a little faster than this, but it's probably because they got a lot going on. But it's super easy to use. It's only 7 seconds. I'm brave for doing this live. Let's reload it. Okay. Let me do that again because somehow wasn't liking it. Okay. Hopefully. Yay. Woo. Okay. So now we are just going to go through and do the simple little edits. So we're going to have our title. So this could be, let's call it creating your first podcast. And then you have your description here. And then when you want to publish, so you can schedule, which is really nice. So what I would do is I would batch record and edit, meaning I would try to do several different podcast episodes, and I'll edit them and then I'll schedule them out for the whole month. That way I can really just sort of set it and forget it. And so that's something you can just be like, okay, schedule the 7th, the next one the 14th, the next one the 21st, the next one the 28th. So when we're ready and we've picked our date, then we can hit confirm. So this one I've now scheduled. If you have a specific season, you can choose that. Episode number, choose that. What type of episode, content. If you want to have specific channel art, you can do that. And literally, you hit save. Let's do test. Literally, you hit save and post or schedule. And so that's it. And then now Anchor is going to go and it's going to process and it's going to spread this out to Apple, to Google, to Spotify, to Stitcher, to everywhere for you. And that's how easy it is to literally start your podcast, get it up and running, get it edited, recorded, and in Anchor, and you are all set to start sharing. Now, something to know is that when you do your podcast for the very first time, it does take time to get approval from all the different networks. So like Apple has a little bit different approval process than say Stitcher and Spotify. So you may slowly see more and more podcast, sharers being added because it just takes time for that approval process. But Anchor's really good. They'll notify you and be like, oh, now you're on Google. Now you're on Spotify. And they do that. Great. And then you can see here in your episode, you have some analytics. You can see how many plays. I mean, we have none because we just put this out. But how many plays, how the episodes did, and, just all the little details. And you can see that overall on your dashboard too here. You can see how many total plays you have, how many total views you have. So it's really so simple, really easy to use. And so hopefully I've encouraged you and you are now feeling really confident to go start your podcast. Now, if anyone has any questions, I saved a little bit of time at the end here for some questions and answers. We can walk through some more of the editing. So if you have any more questions, feel free to put them in the chat here and I will take a look. And thank you, Barbara, for being on here. Barbara is amazing. If anyone needs health coaching and or CUs, Barbara is the woman to talk to. She is a lymphedema specialist. She has a vision board CU course too. It is really awesome. b2advantage.com is Barbara's. And she didn't pay me to say that. I just think she's a great, great person. Awesome. Let's see here. Well, no questions so far. If you do have any questions, oh, thank you, Barbara. I appreciate that. The technology worked for the most part, which is really good. Really, really happy about that. So if you do have any questions, just put them in the comments and I will try to get to them as best as I can. And let me know when you do make your podcast, and we will all try to share some love, like it, and listen to it. So thank you, everyone. I really appreciate it. And check out our other videos. We have a whole playlist on remote jobs, a whole playlist on side hustles, and a whole playlist on tech. So if you're interested in learning about tech and all that, go to our playlist, check them out, and we will see you in our next episode. Thank you so much. Don't forget to like and subscribe too, because I want to see you again. Awesome.